This week we are going to talk about culture. The concept of culture has a very particular definition in anthropology. Culture is the defining concept for anthropology. Remember that cultural anthropologists study the culture of a people in their own homes, regions, and so on. And we will talk about methods in a different lecture. We study culture in humans because humans have culture. There is no place where humans live solely in nature. All humans have culture. To live in nature is to live with behavior patterns with which you were born. For example, eagles don't need to be taught to fly. They learn on their own. The same with dogs and barking. To live in culture is to live according to practice we acquire from others. If we were actually able to survive on our own from infancy without culture, we would not be able to speak our language, nor would we feel we had to wear clothing. We talk a lot about culture and how important culture is, but what exactly is it? One of the earliest attempts to create a concise definition of culture was that of E.B. Tylor in 1871, and his definition has been the basis for many others. Tylor said, "Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, laws, morals, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society." So it's learned behavior. But it's much more complicated than just learning how to act. Animals do that. It's a complex whole that includes knowledge, belief, morals, law, art, customs of a group of people. Culture is embedded in every society. It is the foundation of everything that you do. You start learning culture from the day that you are born, and it is passed down from generation to generation. Culture is distinctly human. Culture is adaptable to any environment. Culture works, and this is why we are such an adaptable species. Anthropologists generally agree that culture has the following 6 characteristics. So we'll start with culture is learned. Any normal child learns the culture in which he or she is raised. So when we look at the children of international adoptions, these children will look genetically like their biological parents, but they are raised as Americans. Likewise, American missionaries in other countries. Children born in those countries look Euro-American, but think and act like natives of those countries. Adults can learn other cultures too, but adults take longer to adopt a culture and may never become fully acculturated. Culture is shared, and what we mean by that is numerous people hold roughly the same set of beliefs, values, and so on. If beliefs are not shared, then they are just individual quirks, not culture. And you might even think you're an individual, so you might think of yourself as being individualistic, but you are still individualistic within the confines of acceptable behavior of your culture. Culture is symbolic, and what that means is that symbols, when we talk about them, those are things that refer to other things. A red octagon outlined in red refers to the concept stop. The symbol means something else. What does the symbol mean? Saying that culture is symbolic means that culture is essentially about meanings that people place or read onto the world. That is, by placing meanings on things, culture turns objects, actions, and so on into symbols of other things or ideas. So an orange and blue sweatshirt with certain designs on it, worn in the city of Denver, especially during football season, would indicate that the wearer is a Denver Broncos fan, passionate about football. That same color scheme might not have the same meaning somewhere else. Being male is symbolic. Being male means that the male person should act in certain ways and not in others. These meanings, interpretations, or ideas are the essence of culture. And we're going to talk about this throughout the entire course. Culture is integrated. And what that means is that its many parts fit together in a generally, but not necessarily completely, coherent, logical way. And there's 2 senses of integration, at least. The first is organizational integration. And what that means is that culture is a system of interconnected parts. And those interconnected parts each affect and are affected by others. So when we think about systems of production, exchange, and consumption, or systems of social relationships, referring to marriage and family and class and so on. Systems of religious beliefs and practices. Those are all interrelated, interconnected, and they affect and are affected by other aspects of culture. So that's organizational integration. Changing one aspect in that generally creates ripples of change through other aspects. There are also cognitive integration, and what that means is that the different ideas, values, beliefs, and so on of the culture fit together logically. They seem to make sense with one another. They often share some broad common themes, underlying logic, and values and beliefs. So, for example, in some cultures, a strong value might be placed on respect or honor, and it may influence many aspects of the culture. In our own culture, we see an emphasis on individualism. We don't place an emphasis on conformity and the good of the entire group. And so in our culture, we would see people sort of striving for individual effort, whereas in other cultures, a lot of behavior focuses on the good of the group as a whole. Other cultures are more focused on aggression, and so we see that cognitive integration. So the way people think is cognitively integrated with themes of culture. Culture is also practical, and in many cases, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in this lecture, it's often put as adaptive in the ecological or evolutionary sense. And what that means is that many aspects of culture are ways of dealing with practical problems of the physical environment, like getting food and keeping warm and keeping dry. Problems of the physical environment, like solving conflicts or forming a family. Or practical in problems of the emotional or cognitive environment, like handling death or unpredictable events. A culture's way of dealing with these problems may not always be effective, but they are meant to be naturalized and unconsidered, meaning they're meant to be automatic. And the meanings that culture places on the world seem natural, normal, and inherently human. Most people don't consciously question or check their culture's values and beliefs. People just assume they are true facts of nature. For example, most women in the U.S. find the notion of polygamy, a husband having multiple wives, obviously and naturally wrong. They think it would never work. Maybe perhaps they think there would be natural jealousy. Maybe because we are such an individualistic culture, we don't see ourselves sharing with someone else. But the Koryak women of Siberia and some Shiite women in Iraq feel that polygamy is normal, natural, and good. To them, being restricted to monogamy would be obviously naturally wrong. And each would think the other was mistaken about polygamy. The Shiite women of Iraq, like others in recent news reports, say of polygamy, our way is better. Culture is arbitrary. And what we mean by that is it's not random, but it's not established by fixed features of the real world. So these are arbitrary ideas, and they differ from culture to culture. Take, for example, Native Americans of the same clan and the United States relationship between brothers and sisters. Both are repelled at physical contact with each other. And these are equally non-rational responses. These are culturally standardized responses. So in Native American clan-based societies, they view the relationship between members of the same clan, even if they are not technically blood related, to have the same relationship that a United States brother and sister would have, and there would be incest rules in place. So arbitrary doesn't mean random. These are beliefs or ideas that are present for a reason, and they're going to differ from culture to culture. Similarly, with the polygamy example, they are different from culture to culture. So one goal of anthropology is to show how given cultures are consistent, ordered, understandable, and make sense in their own context. Anthropologists will ask, why do some groups of people assign certain meanings to things and other groups assign different ones? And then we ask, why do we see things this way and not some other way? Why do some people see things this way and not that way? And why does a given culture have its arbitrary beliefs and not others, which are equally possible? So anthropology encourages us to look at our own culture from outside. We ask, where did these ideas come from? What function do they serve? Who benefits from these ideas? And what do they do to preserve them? Why do people continue to believe in them, or why do they change? And the implication of all of this, and going back to the culture is practical, so the implication is that culture is adaptive. And this suggests that culture is the major way that human populations adapt or relate to their specific habitat to survive and reproduce. So it's how we adapt to different environments. The adaptive nature of culture provides humans with an enormous advantage, adaptive advantage, over all forms of life. Culture is a quick and efficient means of adaptation over a purely biological approach. And the idea, though, that culture is adaptive should not lead us to the conclusion that every aspect of culture is adaptive. It is possible for some features to be adaptively neutral, meaning they neither enhance nor diminish the capacity of a people to survive. And it's even possible for some features of a culture to be maladaptive or dysfunctional. So, for example, the large-scale use of automobiles in our society. It seems to be adaptive for us, right? It gets us from A to B in a much quicker fashion than walking. However, the use of these automobiles coupled with industrial pollutants is currently destroying the quality of air in our environment. If this set of cultural behaviors continues unchecked, it will destroy our environment to such an extent that it will be unfit for human habitation. So it's not likely that such a maladaptive practice will persist indefinitely. And we can see that what is adaptive in one culture may not be adaptive in another. There are elements of our own culture that may not work in every location around the planet. So this lets us see the arbitrary constructed nature of culture. And there's a notion within all of this referred to as naive realism. And naive realism is the assumption that these arbitrary cultural constructs are actually universal, real facts of life. It's the assumption that the concept or way of behaving applies to all people, and that it's a natural feature of the real world. And it's not. Culture is constructed. It's arbitrary and socially constructed. It is not a feature of the real world. And so, for example, and this is an old example, but you still hear this sometimes, English was good enough for Jesus Christ, and it's good enough for the children of Texas. And that was said by Miriam Ferguson, who was the governor of Texas in 1924. There's obviously an assumption that since everyone in her culture spoke English and read the Bible in English, obviously Jesus Christ did too. But English as a universal language is a cultural construct that's specific to our culture. It doesn't necessarily apply outside of our own culture. Other examples of arbitrary meanings, different meanings about food. Every culture defines different things as edible or not. Some of these began as adaptive because of availability in a given environment. We respond to the meanings our culture teaches us to place on potential foods, not simply to the actual food itself. As in people who actually vomit when they are told they have eaten something they consider inedible, like, say, rattlesnake meat. Other examples of responding to culturally constructed meanings, eating sushi or raw fish, or mondongo, beef, which is beef stomach or tripe. Cuy is a guinea pig in Peru. So on the left is our own pet guinea pigs, and on the right are guinea pigs cooked in a stew. We have a problem with that because the meanings we assign to guinea pigs. So the point of that is what we consider to be edible is determined by the meanings placed on the items, not by their taste, their nutrition, and so on. There's nothing inherent in sushi, mondongo, or cuy that actually makes people sick. It is only the strength of the culturally constructed meanings that does that. So here's the point. Culture is arbitrary, meaning it's socially constructed rather than part of the real natural world, and profoundly influential on how people think about and behave in the world, and also profoundly influential on how people perceive the world. And to sort of wrap it up, some key things to remember about culture. Culture is biologically based to an extent and can influence biology, meaning that it's adaptive and can influence sort of the outcome of biological traits. There is ideal versus real culture, and those are important constructs for understanding behavior. And finally, culture is learned, shared, symbolic, integrated, practical, and arbitrary. Ask if you have any questions.